Coming up in today's newscast, the two victims of yesterday's cold-blooded terror attack are laid to rest as the manhunt for their killer continues. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas threatens further financial cuts against Gaza. And coming off of Netta Barzilai's Eurovision victory, Israel now gets ready to compete in this year's Eurovision Junior. The two victims in yesterday's execution-style terror attack have now been named as 28-year-old Kim Levengrond Yecheskel and Ziv Hashbi. Kim lived in Rishon LeZion with her husband and one-year-old son and was laid to rest Sunday evening in the Rosh Ha'ain cemetery. Her husband, Guy, sobbingly promised to raise their son in exactly the way she would have wanted, saying, quote, "I will never forget you, I love you, you will always be my best friend." Her father, Rafael, lamented not being able to protect his daughter or be with her in her moment of need, and Kim's mother, Chava, completely stricken with grief, said she refused to accept that her daughter was now lying in a grave. Friends and extended family also shared their memories and sorrows as the soil was tossed over the grave. Ziv Hashbi, a 35-year-old married father of three, was living in Rosh Ha'ain and was just shy of his 36th birthday this weekend when he and Kim were brutally gunned down Sunday morning at work. He, too, was remembered by his mother as an angel and by his friends as a model son, father, and husband. Thankfully, the third victim is recovering from moderate wounds sustained by the gunfire. As for the terrorist suspect, he's still reportedly on the run, but the IDF has identified him as 23-year-old Palestinian Ashraf Walid Sulaiman Na'alawa. Na'alawa, from the northern West Bank, was reportedly employed as an electrician for the Alon Group company in the Barkan industrial complex where the attack took place. But Sunday morning, arriving at the factory just shy of 7:40 and armed with an automatic submachine gun, Na'alawa went up into the offices on the second floor where he reportedly zip-tied Kim Yecheskel's hands and shot her dead at close range. He then shot the second female victim in the stomach before she was eventually evacuated to Beilinson Hospital in moderate condition. Finally, he shot and killed Ziv Hashbi just prior to fleeing the scene. Now, it's now been nearly 30 hours since the attack, and security forces have yet to apprehend him, though. But the IDF, Shin Bet Police, and Palestinian Authority security forces are all on the hunt for Na'alawa. Further, the IDF has mapped Na'alawa's family home for demolition, and his brother, sister, and several other members of his family and friends have been arrested or detained in connection to the attack. The number of detentions is not yet clear, and some, including the sister, have already been released, but the IDF is thoroughly investigating every possible lead, and there are some interesting clues. Na'alawa didn't appear for work for the last few days prior to the attack, and though he's been praised by terror groups like Hamas, there's no evidence that he was affiliated with any specific group. Also, Na'alawa reportedly left a suicide note for his friend 3 days ago, and the friend worked at the same Alon Group factory with Na'alawa and has been arrested for not bringing the note forward sooner. Regardless, the manhunt continues, and security forces warn that Na'alawa is still considered armed and dangerous. Now, in the wake of such tragedies like yesterday's terror attack and the many others like it, the question we're left asking is how? Where does such hatred come from? Well, following the publication of a 4-year research activity completed by Dr. Arnon Groys, the answer seems to keep coming back to Palestinian schools. In Groys' study, over 365 Palestinian Authority school books for all grades 1 through 12, published between 2013 and 2018, were reviewed. Researchers were looking for any education aimed at peacefully solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What they found was, of course, the exact opposite. And here via Skype with more on the story is Director of the Israel Resource News Agency, David Bidain. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
So, okay, incitement against Israelis and Jews in the Palestinian Authority textbooks is unfortunately nothing new. So what did we learn from this new research, however?
The new research concerns the last 45 books published by the Palestinian Authority for 11th and 12th grade students. In other words, the highest possible grades. And we have their lessons on how to be violent, how to kill, how to liberate Palestine by force of arms, how to accomplish the right of return by force of arms, how to praise anyone who commits acts of murder. Besides the maps which you're seeing on the screen, which eliminate Israel completely, the whole concept of the adulation of anyone who will murder a Jew. That besides that, we already know that the Palestinian Authority will give all kinds of prizes and and honors and for the victim, for the assailant's family for the rest of his life. But here it's something else. It's teaching the children, in this case teenagers, in their last 2 years of school, that they will be honored for life if they kill, if they become a shaheed, a martyr. And this is very, very important. Now we had looked at school books previously for these ages approximately 10 years ago. We didn't see that there. There was a couple of allusions to violent attack, but nothing like this. They have pictures of the of shaheedim of a woman here in a, I don't know if you can see it on the screen there, Dalal al-Mughrabi, who is shown
terrorist, convicted terrorist.
Yeah, she's a woman who is a terrorist who came with her bus, attacked the bus in 1978, killed 38 people. And what's most important is there's a 2-page lesson plan teaching the children to be like her. Now this is unprecedented in there's no such thing as school books, even in the Arab world, which have this kind of praise for murderers. And people say it's a Nazi textbook. No, it's not. Nazis never had anything which openly, their school books did not teach about murdering Jews. It's certainly demonizing Jews. But imagine if you had school books during World War II which praised those who the commandant of Auschwitz or people who conducted mass murders. It doesn't exist. The pictures of killers are throughout the books.
Well, David, my final question for you, unfortunately, is were there any promising excerpts that you were able to find here? Any kind of anything that the textbooks got right?
I got into this business of dealing with Palestinian education as a student more than 40 years ago, always looking for that. Any traces of advocacy for peace, advocacy for reconciliation have been wiped out completely. And it's not even a war against Israel anymore. Now it's a war against the Zionist entity and a war for they equate Zionism with ethnic cleansing. There is no hope in these school books. You ask me about as a social professional who knows Palestinians, this doesn't reflect the Palestinian people, but it certainly reflects the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, who are still in a state of war with Israel. And that's expressed in these new school books. You can see the school books on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com. We're bringing them this week to the United Nations, and I hope that officials of the United Nations will take this seriously, so that donor nations to the PA will at least put conditions on their donations.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us with this report, and good luck with the United Nations presenting that report, and we hope to hear soon about the results of that.
Thank you.
The Residences Affair trial of Sarah Netanyahu began yesterday in the Jerusalem Magistrates Court, with roughly an hour of opening arguments, leaving many on all sides with an uneasy feeling. Sarah was indicted in June in connection to the affair which alleges that she, with the help of former senior Prime Minister's office official Ezra Saidoff, fraudulently diverted over $100,000 worth of taxpayer funding towards paying for chefs and prepared food orders at the Prime Minister's residence. That's despite having a full-time kitchen staff available. At least 15 invoices for chefs were falsified as well to hide what was paid. Sarah is suspected of demanding such treatments, while Saidoff is suspected of directing resident staff in how to hide the evidence and falsify documentation. The total defrauded amount comes out to around 393,000 shekels, and Netanyahu's legal team argued that the case should never have been filed in the first place, though, that the charges are ridiculous, and that the prosecution is deliberately attempting to both withhold pertinent documents from the discovery and complicate the trial with extra judges on the panel. The prosecution responded, however, that in similar cases with similar allegations and severity, a 3-judge panel was appointed. As for Ezra Saidoff, his attorney, Yoshua Reznik, mostly lamented that his client was even there, claiming Saidoff was just being sucked into efforts to go after the Netanyahus. All defendants continue to maintain their innocence, but either way, the next hearing is scheduled for November 13th. Meanwhile, as Sarah Netanyahu is now faced with defending massive and allegedly fraudulent purchases, the Finance Ministry has just blocked the official request for 450,000 shekels, or $125,000, made by the Prime Minister's office for supposed renovations. Legally, the state is required to maintain the Prime Minister's residence, but not to improve or modify or renovate it. Thus, the request was found to be excessive and was rejected. A second request of 100,000 shekels for waterproofing and repairs was then made, but the state has not yet made a decision on this latest requisition. In other finance-related news, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is reportedly livid with the fact that foreign aid dollars have been allowed to flow into the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip without his permission or support. In response, speaking over the weekend, Abbas said that he's now planning to cut more, if not all, PA funding to Gaza. The Palestinian Authority sends some $96 million to the Gaza Strip every month, a number already reduced by Abbas's efforts to bring Hamas to the negotiating table. As it is, the Strip functions on just a few hours of electricity per day and very limited fuel because of the low payments. But with countries like Qatar sending in aid to the Strip via the United Nations, Egypt, and even Israel, Abbas is threatening to stem the flow of any remaining PA funding. Egyptian President Sisi reportedly asked Abbas to reconsider his threats, as putting Gaza into a worse position might endanger the security of Gaza's neighbors, namely the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. Israeli officials have similarly cautioned against completely defunding Gaza for fears that the Strip will fall deeper into a humanitarian crisis that could spill over violently into Israel. Abbas was not reportedly swayed, however, replying to Egyptian President Sisi that it was Hamas's Muslim Brotherhood state that was endangering national security and not Abbas and his policies. Abbas further asserted that the PA should not be fiscally responsible for Gaza in the first place as long as Hamas remains in charge and not the PA or some other Palestinian unity government. So in preparation for the fallout of Abbas's funding cuts, Prime Minister Netanyahu is already warning his cabinet ministers of a potential military campaign against Gaza, saying that, quote, if the reality of civil distress in Gaza is diminished, that's desirable, but that's not certain to happen, and so we prepare militarily. That is not an empty statement, end quote. Tensions, likewise, are rising all across the Palestinian territories, including the West Bank now as well, as Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat has just announced the ending of UNRWA operations in the Israeli capital. The UN agency has been riddled with accusations of exacerbating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and thus has lost funding from the United States to the tune of several $100 million per year. Following the United States' cuts, other nations raised their contributions, eventually reaching over $1 billion in funding for the Palestinian Refugee Agency this year. UNRWA has nonetheless claimed a financial crisis, though, and has discontinued most services. But for Jerusalem, it may not matter in the end anyhow, as Barkat said his municipality would absorb responsibilities over Palestinian education, welfare, and health, saying, quote, we provide services for all residents alike. There are no refugees in our city, end quote. After 8 European governments signed a joint statement at the United Nations calling on Israel to rescind the demolition order on Bedouin West Bank village Khan al-Amal, Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has fired back, sending a letter of his own, decrying the country's flagrant interference in Israel's sovereign affairs. Lieberman sent out letters to the ambassadors of Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Belgium, Poland, and the Netherlands, in which he states that he defends Israel's decision to demolish the Bedouin village of Khan al-Amal. But this was only after these governments signed a joint statement alleging that the demolition would result in very serious threats to the viability of the two-state solution. Lieberman's letter, however, responded saying that the statement invokes that the absurd claim that relocating the residents to proper homes nearby will somehow preclude an eventual political resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He also argued that this issue is internal and these European countries have no right to intervene in the first place. Not only is the village being demolished for being built illegally, but Israeli authorities claim that the shacks and tents in the village pose a threat to the residents because of their proximity to the highway. Opponents and critics, however, argue that the demolition is not an internal matter at all, as the village is located in the West Bank, and the Bedouins argue that they had no choice but to build without permits in the first place, as permits are almost never issued to Palestinians to build in parts of the West Bank. Regardless, late last month, the Defense Ministry handed out notices in the village warning the residents that they had until October 1st to gather their belongings, or the state authorities would do so for them and with force. Yet another disturbing report of anti-Semitism on college campuses has come up this week, with particular attention being drawn again to the University of Michigan. AlTV's Yael Shir has the story.
Thanks, Aaron. That's right. Anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment is a growing epidemic on college campuses around the world. This trend has been funded by some very powerful and radical organizations, such as Peace Now, which has an anti-Israel agenda. These groups are peddling anti-Israel hate speech, encouraging anti-Semitism, and allowing anti-Israel sentiment to grow on campuses.
And what are some of the specific instances that you know about? I know we mentioned just a moment ago University of Michigan.
Yeah, actually, at U of M, at a required lecture for art students, Professor Emory Douglas, who is a former Black Panther, recently compared Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to Hitler. He held up a slide that showed a picture of Netanyahu and Hitler side by side with the words "guilty of genocide" written across their faces.
That's disgusting and important. You know, what did the university do about this? You know, did the students just sit there and listen?
Actually, one student brought it to people's attention. She wrote on Facebook, she posted a picture of the slide and wrote that, quote, "As a Jew who is proud of my people and my homeland, I sat through this lecture horrified at the hatred and intolerance being spewed on our campus." So some people are actually making an effort to get the word out there.
Well, and that's kind of it, you know, that hatred and that kind of that fear-mongering sort of thing that really doesn't belong in a university. But, you know, did the university suspend the professor, Emory Douglas? You know, what actions have been taken?
Unfortunately not. Actually, the opposite. The university's vice president for public affairs actually defended the professor's actions. He said that the professor covered a wide array of subject matter within the context of his work, which looks at the oppression of people across the globe by governmental powers. So, in fact, he endorsed the professor. And then he went on to say that the school does not control or censor what speakers present. So, it's just a problem that is getting worse and escalating because the authority members aren't doing anything to stop it.
Right, and honestly, it sounds a bit like a cop-out. You know, like, I can't believe that the school actually defended the professor and completely backed out of responsibility over the curriculum. You know, if this is a required course, there should be some sort of oversight about what it is that you're teaching these kids or requiring them to learn. But this isn't the first time that University of Michigan has been complicit in anti-Semitism on campus either. You know, in fact, we actually just recently reported on a related incident.
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. Actually, there have been a series of incidences at University of Michigan. Last month, as you reported, a University of Michigan professor refused to recommend a student for a semester abroad in Israel because he supports the BDS movement. So anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests on campus are becoming violent. At Vassar College at the beginning of this semester, students recently published a document called the Disorientation Guide, which targeted Zionist, Jewish, and pro-Israel groups on campus and praised the BDS movement. And they did some really violent things, like encourage students to slap a Zionist, vandalize campus property, harass the college president, and other things.
Yeah, I mean, that's advocating assault, quite literally, I believe. You know, it's a little incredulous, to be perfectly honest, that's the discourse really for anything, especially on a college campus where you're supposed to have this kind of, you're supposed to be exposed to differing opinions, regardless of where they stand. And you know, again, I think that this anti-Semitism is disgusting, but regardless of where you stand on that topic, being able to discuss it is kind of the crux of having a university education.
Exactly.
But what repercussions have there been with that?
Well, actually, the Trump administration is now changing how the Education Department is investigating allegations of anti-Semitism. This policy change was outlined in a letter by the head of the Office for Civil Rights, Kenneth Marcus, who also reopened a case at Rutgers University and initiated the plan to adopt the working definition of anti-Semitism, which is defined by the International Organization for Holocaust Remembrance. So this definition includes demonizing or delegitimizing Israel, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor.
Sure.
And the definition also includes a clause which defines anti-Semitism as applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Yeah. So it, is moving forward somewhat.
All right, well, it looks like there's still a lot to do to combat this growing trend on campuses, but hopefully you were right, and this new action will help. Thanks for your report, yeah.
Thanks, Aaron.
Spanish journalist Julio de la Guardia has just been charged with manslaughter after running over and killing ultra-Orthodox pianist Chaim Tukaczynski while under the influence of alcohol. The hit-and-run incident took place last month in Jerusalem. Reports say La Guardia fled the scene, ran a red light, and drove over the speed limit to add fuel to the fire. Prosecutors requested La Guardia be held in custody until after the legal proceedings against him begin. Chaim Tukaczynski was a 31-year-old ultra-Orthodox pianist, composer, and conductor. Tukaczynski was a former resident of Kiryat Motzkin, but left his ultra-Orthodox yeshiva at 18 in favor of attending a music academy in Jerusalem, where he excelled in his undergraduate and graduate degrees. Tukaczynski was killed in central Jerusalem's Paris Square while walking back from the Western Wall on the first night of Sukkot. The suspect, LaGuardia, drove away and was arrested 1 hour later with a blood alcohol count 3 times higher than the legal limit. LaGuardia told police he was being harassed by 3 Palestinians following his car on motorbikes at the time, and that they were trying to corner him. He said he was trying to get away from them when the incident occurred. But after, he stopped a short distance from the accident, not knowing what happened, but left quickly when locals approached him, fearing then that they would attack him. He later approached a police vehicle and told the officers that it was likely him that they were looking for. LaGuardia worked as a foreign correspondent in Israel for many years for a few Spanish outlets, but was kicked out of Israel in 2011 after a domestic dispute. It's unclear how he was issued a new work visa and allowed to return back to the country. All right, Israel's Netta Barzilai took the music world by storm when she finished first at the 2018 Eurovision Song Competition, and now Israel is looking to secure a second victory at Eurovision Junior. 13-year-old Noam Dadon is now set to compete against 19 other countries for the win. Dadon beat 5 other contestants on Tuesday evening already to get the honor of representing Israel at the Eurovision Junior competition. But this was not Dadon's first time on primetime, as he came in second place in Keshet's music school series back in 2013 as well. Dadon impressed the judges with his beautiful voice in his remade rendition of the song Mechakeh, or Waiting, by Rita and Idan Reichel. And then after his victory, Dadon received a special message of encouragement from Netta Barzilai, who won the Eurovision Song Contest in Portugal earlier this year, bringing the next competition to our very own city of Tel Aviv. She was quoted saying, "I'm so happy you won the chance to represent us. Just remember that at the end of the day, it's the thing you love doing most, the most pure thing, just making other people happy," end quote. Eurovision Junior has been going on since 2003, but Israel participated only twice, in 2012 and 2016. But with a win from Netta earlier this year, Israel is feeling extra lucky, and hopefully we can pull off a double win this year. Well, Noam will compete against the other young singers on November 25th, so just make sure to tune in and find out. There are a lot of goods that in Israel can be quite expensive. That's why Israelis make a lot of online purchases, but once the product gets over a certain size, the shipping costs alone can outweigh the benefits of just paying a little more in the stores. Well, an Israeli startup based in Hod HaSharon called Landigo now wants to change that by making buying large items from overseas much more affordable. The business-to-consumer e-commerce today does not exist for large items. Israelis can only buy locally from a retailer who imports the items from abroad and then resells them. When online shoppers try to buy a large item from abroad today, they're either notified that the item cannot be shipped overseas, they receive a very high shipping quote, or they're asked to simply manage the import themselves. But Landigo is a smart, data-driven, smart container software that will cut cost and allow e-commerce purchases for items such as fridges, sofas, and the like to be much more accessible to Israelis. Landigo's mission is to enable low-cost shipping for these large items for these online global sellers, changing the way that we buy today. And Landigo says it can enable retailers like Target or Crate & Barrel to deliver items directly to international shoppers as well. Using their smart container sharing platform, Landigo connects online retailers to shoppers and ocean freight movers, enabling maximizing container space utilization. This lowers costs for everyone involved, but that's not all. Landigo has automated this whole process end-to-end, handling all import and export requirements, including tax and duties and delivery costs to customers, all the way up to their doorstep, making Landigo one of the most comprehensive cost-saving shipping services on earth. Ruth Reiner, the co-founder and chief marketing officer, said, quote, "We are making buying a fridge overseas as simple as buying an iPhone case from Amazon," end quote. And I, for one, am now very excited for my next buy. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. With an Israeli startup trying to enable cheaper shipping to Israel, today's word is mishloach, meaning shipment or delivery. When someone moves houses or countries, they do a mishloach, or shipment of their furniture. When someone has a baby or it's Valentine's Day, one often sends a congratulatory mishloach of flowers. And on Israeli holidays, it is common to send a mishloach of goods and wine to your friends and family. You can even just order dinner with a mishloach or delivery. Whatever the case, I think we can agree that there are very few things better than receiving a long-waited-for mishloach. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy with a low of 71 or 22 degrees Celsius. And tomorrow you can expect partly cloudy skies and a slight drop in temperatures to a pleasantly warm high of 82 or 28 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.62 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.